Thank you so much for joining our first Train the Trainer workshop as part of our summit series that we are doing, which is really just our way of creating a online community for students in this really tough time. I hope that all of you are taking care of yourselves and each other as best you can. My name is Silvia Zenteno, and I'm the Director of Educational Programs and Training at It's On Us. Before we get started on today's webinar, I just wanted to take some time to share some words of wisdom. So I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that this is not a time to expect things to be business as usual. And we are in the middle of a pandemic, both our public health pandemic, the racial pandemic, and we are really hoping that this summit series is something that can help all of us come together in this really tough time. Whatever your response is to everything that's going on, I just want to remind you that your response is extremely valid. And if you haven't registered for other webinars that we have as part of the summit series, please make sure to do it. You can always find new and existing webinars on our website at bit.ly, so bit.ly/ and in all caps, Summit Series 20. For today, I'm going to be here live so that I can be attentive to the chat, and we are going to share a pre-recorded Train the Trainer of me actually doing the webinar. So I'm going to be switching over to that now, and then any questions that you have throughout, please feel free to put them in the chat. I will be here live to answer them, and then at the end, we can do a live Q&A as well. So again, thanks so much.
This webinar is being recorded and will be made available afterwards, as well as answers to any questions that we do not get to today. Please direct any questions you have to the chat area of the webinar, and we will do our best to answer them throughout the webinar and at the end if we don't get to any of them. If your question is not answered either throughout the webinar or in the recap, please make sure to reach out to us. My email is just Silvia, S-I-L-V-I-A, @civicnation.org. All right, so first, I just want to take a minute to introduce myself. My name is Silvia Zenteno. That is me to the right in the red dress. I'm the Director of Educational Programs and Training here at It's On Us, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. Before coming to It's On Us, I was at the Justice Department's Office on Violence Against Women, and then worked under the Violence Against Women pillar at the Biden Foundation. My background is in campus and youth sexual violence prevention and response programming, and I am really excited and feel really lucky to be here with you today. So again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. It is to the right of the screen on the bottom, there is a tab that says chat. There's one that says questions, but if you could just put them in the chat box instead, that will be helpful, and we'll make sure to monitor that. So on today's webinar, we will be discussing sexual assault awareness. This is one of our pillars, and we will go over exactly what that means in a few minutes. Our goal is to provide you with the tools, the background, and the information to host these trainings yourself on your campus. Right now, we know that that is something that might be difficult or not possible, but maybe you can do it virtually. But that is the goal. We will be going over first some background information and materials, and then we'll dive right in from there. So we begin with a quick overview of the initiative. So It's On Us began in 2014 in the Obama-Biden White House as a recommendation from the White House Task Force to protect students from sexual assault. Student activists on campuses around the country activated to demand a change, and the campaign grew out of the need for that change. So today, almost 500,000 people have taken the It's On Us pledge, which says that we all have a responsibility to be a part of a violence-free campus, and students have held more than 6,000 events around the country. So once students established their chapters, they really wanted to know what the next step was and how they could do more. So we've sort of transformed from a campaign into more of a program now. This year, starting last fall, is our first where we are rolling out our educational programming. We received a lot of feedback that students felt that programming available was either too expensive, or the language was not student friendly, or content was too broad and not adaptable for certain communities. So we decided to develop our own material based on this direct feedback. This became our goal for the 2019-2020 academic year. For those of you who watched the amazing show Insecure, you will recognize the We Got Y'all logo on the right of the screen. We function more like the diagram on the left of the screen, in a very decentralized way. Our goal is to train student leaders that will lead and are well prepared to lead this movement. Okay, so our process. We spent the first quarter of last year listening to students, holding focus groups and interviews, and then developed the material, piloted it, and we refined it based on that feedback. So each educational tool that we have was developed based on that direct feedback and the students' needs. They draw from the most up-to-date research and best practices, which are cited within each document. Here on the bottom of the screen, you can see our 3 pillars in blue. Or they might not show us, but the 3 pillars are at the bottom of the screen. Best practices tell us that you can achieve the most culture change on a campus if you have programming that covers community engagement. So which outside groups is your campus working with on this issue, ways anyone can intervene, or bystander education, and programming specifically on what your options are at your school. So our 3 pillars aim to address all 3 of those areas. So this shows some gaps identified in programming on a national level. Please note that there is no national program that could be perfect, because the most effective way to get an audience to retain information and use it is by centering the material to them. So we encourage you to incorporate examples that are most relevant when you can. Whatever that means for your audience, for your community, please feel free to do that. We know that that is the way to make this most relevant for the audience that you're doing the training for. All right, well, before we begin, we wanted to share with you a facilitator's guide that we developed and will be available on our website for you to use in preparation for your workshop. So here's the guide, and we can show you what it looks like. There it is. And again, this will be available online. There are just some things to consider before giving each of the workshop. Feel free to print this out and check things off as you prepare. Again, the more prepared you are, the less likely you are to forget any important pieces. And If this is helpful to you, please make sure to print it out ahead of time. All right. So another piece that you may want to incorporate in your workshop is our educational videos. In addition to our written educational resources, we wanted to provide other forms of messaging as an option for workshops and trainings. So we worked with the creative agency Fancy NYC to film real students telling real stories for each of our focus areas. It was a really difficult but amazing project, and we are eternally thankful to the brave students who shared their stories to use as educational material. A warning that this content, it may be triggering for some, so please feel free to look away from the screen for about 2.5 minutes. If you prefer to not see the video, we are going to share it with you right now.
Dear sorority sister who needed a listening ear, your roommate called me and asked me to come to your dorm room. She told me of how you had stripped your bed of the bedding and thrown it in the dumpster, how you refused to sit up from the bare mattress and to speak to anyone. You laid there, curled up and crying. You needed someone who understood what you had gone through, someone who had been there before, someone who believed you. You needed someone to remind you that it wasn't your fault. Suddenly, reality truly set in. My sister had been sexually assaulted the night before, and she needed my support. He was a new boyfriend of yours, but he was different that night. You described to me what happened, the lack of consent, the intense and forceful nature that made you uncomfortable and scared, the feeling of needing to throw away your sheets, your bedding, the gifts and love notes he had given you. All that was left were the words you feared to leave your lips. Sexual assault. And then you looked at me and asked, how did you move on? How did you get out of bed each day? What is life like after this? I looked at you and I said what I wish someone had told me. First of all, I'm sorry this happened to you. No one should ever experience this. Second, I believe you, and I know you are telling me everything you can tell me right now. I promise to continue to listen if you continue to tell. Lastly, I love you, and you are strong. You will get through this. You have proven such strength to me, to our sisters, and most importantly to yourself. I am grateful for your trust in me then, now, and in whatever capacity you may want in the future. I owe you support because I never want another sister to go through this ever again. Sincerely, Carly. It's on us to end sexual assault. Learn how to support a survivor at itsonus.org.
These discussion questions are really brief. If you're having really a shorter training and maybe just wanted to go through something quickly, you could show the video and then go over the discussion questions, and that would be much shorter. It would be, it could be like a 15-minute conversation if you really wanted to. So that's something that will be available online as well. We can also share these links in follow-up email with you. So this slide begins the PowerPoint slideshow that we're going to be providing online for you to use in your training. Feel free to choose the most relevant pieces in your presentation. If you do not have the full hour for the training, this training is usually about 45 minutes to an hour. Okay, so of course, the first slide is a table of contents. This is a list of topics that we will be covering in the session. Note that there is a slide for questions at the end, so we recommend asking everyone to write their questions down and ask in the end in case their questions haven't been answered, or maybe someone else had a similar question. So it's a lot easier to stay on top of time if you just save the questions for the end. So for anyone who hasn't already introduced themselves, when you're doing this training, this is a great opportunity to do so, and to introduce anyone who is presenting with you. If you're in a smaller group, feel free to go around the room. This is a good time to get people talking. Usually I just ask for name, pronoun, and a fun fact, or it could be name, pronoun, and really anything else, favorite ice cream flavor, anything you'd like. But it's a good chance to get people talking. All right, so our first topic is addressing what sexual assault awareness is and why we are here talking about it today. So at It's On Us, sexual assault awareness refers to programs, training, and events that provide background on the prevalence of campus sexual assault and the meaning of consent, as well as policies pertaining to what campuses should be doing to combat sexual violence. The goal is for campus communities to become more aware of the sexual assault culture, and that includes who this violence affects the most, in order to make changes, and for colleges and universities to create environments where all students are safely able to pursue their education. So this is where you would go to find ideas and materials that can be used to develop sexual assault awareness activities, events, and trainings to use on your campus. So if you are interested in doing any of those, or you want to plug that with people you're doing your training with, feel free to check out our website under sexual assault awareness. What are your rights, you ask? First, we should go over some definitions so that everyone is on the same page. We think this is really important. So I will just read through these quickly. Sexual assault is sexual contact or behavior that occurs without explicit consent of the victim. It includes rape and unwanted sexual touching, among others. Sexual harassment is unwelcome sexual advances, requests, or sexual favors, and other verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature in the workplace or learning environment. Dating violence is physical, sexual, emotional, or verbal abuse from a romantic or sexual partner. Domestic violence is a pattern of behaviors used by one partner to maintain power and control over another partner in an intimate relationship. It includes the use of physical and sexual violence, threats and intimidation, emotional abuse, and economic deprivation. That's very important. Stalking is engaging in a course of conduct directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to fear or for his or her safety. So we recommend just reading through these definitions. A lot of the people in your training might already know these definitions, but it never hurts to go through them again. All right, so while Title IX guidance can change, the actual law is still here to protect you. So it says that discrimination on the basis of sex is not legal. No person shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be subject to discrimination under any educational program or activity operated by a recipient that receives federal financial assistance, which is most of your universities. Most universities have to abide by Title IX and are receiving, in some shape or form, some amount of federal funding. There are some federal laws that do protect you on your campus that you should be aware of. The Violence Against Women Act and the Clary Act are two that we talk about a lot. Sorry. The Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act of 2015 amended the Clary Act to add additional rights to campus victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. So that is important to note that there have been changes, and the goal is that each time either of these are reauthorized, that there are additional requirements under them for students that are helpful and make changes like through time. So we always like to remind you that even on the federal level, there are a lot of laws that are really in place to help you. The legal documents are extremely wordy, but these are the main points to make sure to let attendees know. They do have wording for prevention education. So institutions are required to provide students and employees awareness programs, prevention programs on the crimes that we are covering. Student and employee rights. So institutions must provide victims of the crimes covered above with written explanation of their rights. So that should be in your campus policies. And disciplinary procedures. All disciplinary procedures must be conducted by trained parties at the institution. So that really includes anyone who's on a panel, anyone who is a part of Title IX, all of those people should be receiving proper training. All right, so what is consent? Consent is needed to participate in any sexual activity. It's the permission that is or is not given for something to happen. And it is about communication and respect for people's boundaries and bodies. It's really important to go over this. If you need to print this slide out and pass it out, that is fine too. If someone is under the influence, they cannot consent. You always have the right to say no. The lack of a no is not a yes. And a yes once does not mean an ongoing yes. So we are including these group discussion questions. If you have this training with a larger group, feel free to split the groups up into smaller groups. Or if you want, you can also have this as a full group discussion. You can just write the answers on the board and just have these discussions. Hopefully it gets people talking and really thinking about consent. So we also included an opportunity for a small group discussion. These activities are important to have because they allow for the group to connect on the broader issue on ways that this specifically affects and exists on their campus. So this is a great opportunity to just write down the feedback. And if you work with community partners, this is something that you can take back to them as well. Again, after that, just come back into the larger group and let everyone know that you can now brainstorm ways to use this discussion to spread awareness and continue doing this work. So, sexual assault as a public health issue, very important. Sexual assault was not always seen as a public health issue. This is something that activists have fought for a long time. We know that women who are sexually assaulted or abused are over twice as likely to have PTSD, depression, or chronic pain following the violence as non-abused women. An estimated 40% of rape victims suffer from severe emotional distress. 34% of students who have experienced sexual assault drop out, and this is higher than the overall dropout rate. And more than 40% of college students who were sexually victimized also reported experiencing institutional betrayal, which is something that we will go over later in the slides. This is really important to note because if we cannot prevent sexual violence, it is something that will continue to affect most parts of the world. And it is not something that is on each survivor alone. we should all be working together. Sexual violence is an epidemic that we can work, that all of us as a country, as a world, can work together, and that's the only way that we're really going to eliminate the violence. All right, so it's really important for us to talk about trauma when we're talking about sexual violence as a public health issue. The neurobiology of trauma talks about the neurobiology chemical process that happens when someone freezes. We can't understand how people respond when they experience fear without understanding the way that fear happens within our circuits. When we're attacked, the fear releases stress chemicals that impair the prefrontal cortex. And I believe we have, on the next slide, we have a diagram of this. The prefrontal cortex is what allows us to think rationally. So what we remember later is driven by the circuitry of fear, and it keeps us from focusing our attention on what we need to focus on. We end up remembering specific things our brain focuses on, which could be random. And so we have this video that we'd like to show you.
Hormones, very helpful in so many ways. When those 4 hormone levels are very high in the body, it interferes with other structures in your brain that are trying to be mechanisms of the memory. So it's one of those times where our body's kind of working at cross purposes. Those hormones are really helpful for fight, for flight, for mitigating the pain, but they cause cellular damage in 2 key structures of our brain that work to lay down the memory. What we've learned from the neurobiology of trauma research is that the memory is static. In this bits and pieces fragmented way of they start one thing, but then they stop abruptly and then they start talking about something else, or they start explaining it very generally and then they start throwing in random details. It can be very confusing for law enforcement. And a lot of law enforcement, based on other training they've had, will look at that and say, this looks suspicious to me, because it seems like they're making it up as they're going along. They're not making it up as they're going along. They're having difficulty recalling the different pieces of the assault because of the way the trauma of the assault affected the way the memory is laid down. So for law enforcement, they see this completely disorganized, discombobulated presentation and they say, I'm not believing this. This seems made up to me. What they're really seeing is evidence of trauma. What they're really seeing is how trauma impacts memory formation and then memory recall. So I think it's important for law enforcement to keep in mind that when they see that really confusing stop-start disorganized presentation, to think about that what they're seeing is trauma. What they're seeing is a survivor trying to reach into the different pieces and parts of their brain and all the different fragments of that memory, and they're doing their best to put it together and to give it back. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is that the research is very clear that the accuracy of the memory is intact. So even though the storage is fragmented and can come out kind of sounding confusing and in bits and pieces, the actual recall, accurate. One way to explain how trauma affects memory is with a simple example of Post-it notes. Let's say that listening to this interview, you were trying to write down the information. And let's say rather than a nice tablet of paper, all I gave you was a Post-it note, a little tiny Post-it note. And that all you could do was write down the notes from this interview on Post-it notes. Well, depending upon the size of the Post-it note, you might be able to get a few words written down. You might, if you got a good sized Post-it note, you might be able to get several sentences down. Or if you got a good sized Post-it note, you'd be able to write many, many different things, okay? Now I want you to imagine trying to write down all the notes from this interview on Post-it notes. And I want you to gather them all up and I want you to take them to a desk, the world's messiest desk, because that's really what the human brain is. And I want you to take all these little precious Post-it notes that have your notes on them, and I want you to scatter them all over the desk. I want you to put some on top. I want you to stick some underneath the pile. I want you to put some in the interview that's about sexual assault. I want you to put some that says policies and procedures manual, obviously misfiled. Scatter it everywhere. Now, imagine trying to come back to that world's messiest desk 24 hours, 36 hours, 3 weeks, 6 months later. find all of the Post-it notes, get them, put them in the correct order, and tell it back. That's what we're asking survivors to do when we're asking them to recall a traumatic event, when we're asking them to tell their story.
So that is, thank you to Dr. Rebecca Campbell. That is one of my favorite examples of the neurobiology of trauma. So the hippocampus is where we store our experiences, and so it develops around age 5, which is why we don't usually remember before then. So imagine your pre-age 5 old memory, and that's what we're dealing with. The more anxiety, stress, fear, terror, the less we are going to be able to remember. So think about evolution. Long ago, every day was there was the threat of a big animal coming and preying on us. So our brains evolved to react to this in a way that made sense. The fear triggered this reaction so that we would not get distracted by our thoughts and get eaten. The response makes us forget some factors so that we can react quickly and get away. And these are just some ways that the neurobiology of trauma, that this trauma may reflect in some survivors. There may be a flat effect, there may be a fragmented or disorganized memory, again, like the Post-it notes that Dr. Rebecca Campbell showed us. And there may also be rapidly changing emotions or mood swings. So institutional betrayal is something that we earlier. This is the wrongdoings that are perpetrated by an institution upon individuals dependent on that institution, including failure to prevent or respond supportively to wrongdoings by individuals. So this can be your institution. It could be your college or university. It can also be a group of friends that you have a lot of trust in and exhibit some of these behaviors. It can also be your family. So we can, as survivors, we can experience this, and it can come from a lot of different groups, either at once, different times, and is usually a group that we have a lot of trust in, and that leads us to feel this sort of betrayal. Some of the effects of institutional betrayal are anxiety, trauma-specific symptoms, dissociation, and problematic sexual functioning. These, of course, are not the only effects. So real quick, we want to talk about DARVO, which was recently coined by Jennifer Freud, a professor of psychology at the University of Oregon. It refers to a reaction that perpetrators of wrongdoing, particularly sexual offenders, may display in response to being held accountable for their behaviors. DARVO stands for deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. So the perpetrator or offender may deny the behavior, attack the individual doing the confronting, and reverse the roles of the victim and offender so that the perpetrator assumes the role of the victim and turns on the true victim. So here we have one example, and we are going to go into some real life examples. But first, here are the effects of DARVO. So these stats are related to DARVO, and in this first study, they surveyed survivors and asked, have you ever been wronged by someone? The study found that the more DARVO was exhibited, the more the survivors blamed themselves. All right, so this is an activity that we really encourage you to have when you're doing this training. We have a series of clips that you can show and have people identify pieces of the clips that where DARVO is exhibited. For this example, so we usually show this example of 8th grade first. We are running a little short on time today, so we're not going to show the clip. But for anyone who has seen 8th grade, this is the scene, this is a car scene where Kayla is with the boy that is trying to pressure her to play Truth or Dare. And you can see that Kayla exhibits being uncomfortable. She's stressed, fearful, and when she tries to say no, the boy immediately turns the situation around to blame Kayla for the situation going wrong. So that is where we see DARVO exhibited. This next example, the clip is a little bit shorter, so we can actually show this and do this one together.
You sound like you're playing the victim here. You sound like R. Kelly.
Okay. So R. Kelly turned the narrative around from the children being the victim here to him being attacked and being the victim in this situation. So that is a very clear example of DARVO. And again, you can do this as a class with your training, have a lot more back and forth. So we do include these discussion questions for you to go through. Again, if you're presenting with someone, maybe someone can write them on the board. Maybe you can just pick a couple to go over if you have time constraints. But these are here as an example if you would like to use them. We know that experiencing trauma can impair our ability to remember everything in the order that it happened. So, you know, going into these discussions, I think is really important to just review that. So creating effective sexual assault awareness programs. This is really my bread and butter. So, for this slide, you could go around and say, hey, can anyone think of examples of these that our school provides? So a comprehensive program includes ongoing training in different areas of sexual assault awareness, different areas as in not just one, school procedures, available resources, off campus, on campus, training for specific campus communities, Greek life, athletics, different years. We know that the red zone looks differently for freshmen as it does for seniors. Policies and laws are to be explained. So that includes national laws that affect you, whatever state you're in, those laws, and your local and your campus policies. And awareness activities. These should be funded by your school. So if you, whether you are an official group or not, these are things that your school should be invested in and are part of having a truly comprehensive program. So talk to your school about what they're doing, try to make sure that these 4 pieces are really being incorporated. And again, that does include all 3 of our pillars. So you should have some pieces of sexual assault awareness. What is sexual assault? What are the policies? Survivor support. What are the options for survivors on campus, off campus? How do you respond? And bystander education. How do we take little steps each day to move towards a safer campus as a whole? All right, and that concludes this presentation.
All right, thanks so much for Kenyora, who is working in the back end of the tech. It's a little bit trippy to watch yourself in the recording, but I just wanted to come back live. Thank you to everyone who stayed to watch the video. I know that we've gotten a lot of questions in the chat, so if you have other questions, we can answer those. I do have one that I was about to answer, and I can just answer it live here. So thank you, Audrey, who asked, are there any male-targeted programs for fraternities that are recommended? So we are working to develop this as part of our curriculum. We were going to have a really amazing student leader who has done work with us in the past join us to do a session specifically on this because she had actually done some really great work as a regional advisor in this area. We unfortunately, because of capacity, weren't able to get her to present, but we're still working to see what we are able to share with you. So bear with us, but we will have something coming soon. Right now on our website in the tools and resources section, we do, however, have some Greek life related resources, as well as one list of activities that you can do with fraternities and some sample questions for those activities. So please feel free to check that out. And then if anyone else has other questions, feel free to add them in the chat and I can answer them. Awesome, not seeing questions. Thank you, Carly, as well. What are the 3 pillars? Oh, okay. That's a great question. So we developed our 3 pillars based on a lot of landscape analysis that we did. And right now we have sexual assault awareness, which is this webinar that you are on right now. That talks about consent education. We also have bystander education, which talks about how to intervene as a bystander. And then we also have survivor support, which talks about what you can do if a friend or someone you know discloses to you about their assault. We know that being that first point of contact is really important, so we talk about some ways to help support them and lead them to the correct professional resources. Are there any resources for graduate programs? Right now, we are no, right now we do not have any graduate program resources on our website. So I would look out for them. We have been working with some regional advisors that are in graduate school. So we know that this is definitely a gap that we want to fill. So we appreciate whenever someone points something out that we should be providing, we really appreciate that. So more to come. Could you send us the slides through email? So we will be sharing the recording for today with you. I don't think that we can do an email with the slides because that would be a little bit tedious for our tech team. But we will see what we can do, and maybe we can post the slides for you on our website. However, I will say that we have a previous deck in this for this Train the Trainer workshop that you can use that's already on our website in the resources tab. All right, and we have a question from Kimberly. Would you recommend encouraging awareness during the freshman year of college to help protect incoming students? Yes, so we know that students are most vulnerable during that freshman year. There is what we call the red zone, which is when schools start up until Thanksgiving time. And that is when freshmen girls in particular are very vulnerable to sexual violence. So yes, we do encourage. Do you have any really good red zone resources? Yes, actually, I am going to refer you to our partner organization in the Summit series, NRAPE on Campus, who is doing a lot on the red zone. They're really great. Kenyura, who is helping with the tech on this call, has been doing some really good work. So look out for that on their website. That's nrapeoncampus.org. And that looks like it might be all of the questions. Yeah. Oh, we appreciate any ideas. Yeah, any feedback, let us know. So yes, more to come, more to come, more to come. Thank you everyone who joined us. If you have any other questions, please feel free again to email me. You have my email. It's just Silvia, S-I-L-V-I-A, @civicnation.org. And again, Red Zone resources will be posted at nrapeoncampus.org. Our tools and resources are at itsonus.org, and follow us on all social media. Check back for new sessions for the series. If you were a fan of the Post-it note example, check out Dr. Campbell's session that I am so excited that she will be doing with us for this Summit series. But again, thank you so much. Please stay safe. Take care of yourselves. Be healthy. Bye-bye.